I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co, and today I'm doing one of my favorite video series on the channel, and a series that I rarely get to do. Play This, Not That. Play This, Not That is a series where I take a look at two games that are worth comparing for a variety of reasons, at least in my opinion, and then I tell you a little bit about, I go through a bunch of aspects from the price, the mechanics, the art, I go through all the elements, and then at the end of all of them, I tell you which game I like more and why. Sometimes it is indeed a play this and not that, other times it's a play this more than that. I'd say usually it's more play this more than that, because usually when I compare games like this, it's because I like them both, and I want to give you the, end takeaway as to which one I like better and why. With that, today we are going to be looking at Vindication and Vestige. These two games are very much comparable because of the fact that they are both from Orange Nebula and they are both based on the same system. Vindication has been around for quite some time, coming up, I think it's close to 10 years now since this came out. I'd have to take a look at the dates. And Vestige came out last year. It was crowdfunding on last year, and the final game is shortly, depending on when you watch this video. It is already starting to deliver, shortly delivering, all of that stuff. But I've gotten a chance to play this both in its prototype form and also multiple times in its final production form, going through the various play modes so that I can compare these two games. And this is a particularly notable comparison because Vindication was once upon a time my favorite game of all time. Not this past year, but like 2 years ago it got like my favorite game of all time. As it is, it's still in my top 10. It's like my top 5 games of all time. I absolutely adore what Vindication does and how it works, and Vestige, based on that, was a game that I was very much looking forward to being able to explore further past the prototype phase to get a sense of the pros and cons of the different systems and which one is a better fit for me. I'm going to give you a high-level overview of what the games are doing. This is not going to be a rules video by any means, so if you're looking for a better breakdown of how these games play, check out some of the content, either content I've done, other channels have done, but at a high level, in Vindication/Vestige, you're going to be playing out on a board that has tiles that you'll be exploring those tiles as you go through it. This over here is a mismatch of the two games, more so Vindication on the right and more so Vestige on the left. You're basically going to have your explorer wandering along between these little intersections between the tiles, and on your turn you're going to be moving, activating a location, and then activating one of your characters. The game is going to have a bunch of companions in the game. You have companions, or you have contacts, or chop bots, different characters that you can activate to get the various attributes that you'll be placing out onto the board in order to gain these attributes that you can then combine to get these higher level cards. You're going to have, depending on the game, you have different cards that you're going for, but you basically have the same 6 attribute system where attributes combine into other attributes to give you access to relics, to artifacts, augmentations, enhancements, all these different cards that will power you up. You ultimately are trying to get as many points as possible through the combination of gathering the various contacts, the companions in the game, through taking control of locations, through finding those end game scoring cards. There's a lot of areas to score, and it's all about trying to figure out the puzzle on the grid, again, whichever grid you're playing in order to optimize how you can take advantage of your movement, your abilities, your companions, in order to get as many points before triggering endgame in a variable endgame scoring condition. And that's the high level idea of what both of these games are doing. Almost everything I said applies to both games, but there are differences between the games, and we'll talk more about those differences when we get up to the mechanic comparison. Because we're going to be comparing the price, the ease of learning, the art and components, the theme, and then of course the mechanics, which is usually the largest section. To that end, let's go ahead and start with the first point: why compare these games? This is the spiritual successor to this game. It's based on the same system. You can see some from the grids, they are very much overlaid. They both have the same context. They both have the same core ideas. The comparability of these games is kind of baked into what Vestige is, to the point that when this was on crowdfunding, there was a legitimate question from fans of Vindication: do I need this or not? If I love Vindication, should I get Vestige? If I didn't like Vindication, should I get Vestige? Are they the same game, or are they different enough? And they are very much different, but they are based on the same system. As far as the price of the two games, this is an area where Vestige is going to win hands down. Vindication currently, if you try to get this game, at least on Orange Nebula's site, it's $99. I haven't checked retail for this, but $99 for the base version of Vindication, not this big box all in all the expansions. There's a whole lot of variations of, there's a whole lot of expansions and big boxes you can get, but the base game of Vindication is a $99 game. Vestige, the base retail version on crowdfunding, Learning was $49, the deluxe version was $79. Whichever way you chop it up, it's going to be a cheaper game than Vindication, and specifically designed to be a cheaper game. A much smaller box. Again, this is not the box to compare it to, but even with the regular Vindication box, it is a smaller box, a smaller form factor. It tries to bake the same game into a smaller price point to make it more accessible to many, which means price point wise, Vestige is coming in at an easy win. As far as the ease of learning and the teach between the two games, they are mostly comparable. I'd say the biggest area where Vestige is a little bit more difficult than Vindication is going to be when you introduce the Nemesis play. Nemesis is going to be a solo-based system where you can introduce a Nemesis character. There's a variety of Nemesis characters you can have access to, and those characters are either going to be designed for solo play, for cooperative play between you and others against the Nemesis, or even just to have a full roundtable of me and you and a Nemesis in play, and then also team modes as well. The Nemesis is probably the one area that is a bit more difficult as far as the ease of learning and teach, because after learning the entire game system, you also have to learn the nuances of how each Nemesis operates, and then reading their own individual setup text and their rules and the various effects they're going to have, the triggers. So the Nemesis probably adds more, but also it's not a totally fair comparison because Vindication just doesn't have that at all. So the only area which I think Vestige is more difficult than Vindication is a fully extra aspect to it. That would be comparing the expansions. That would be like comparing all the expansions that Vindication adds, which to be fair, Vindication has a bunch of expansions, that also adds rules overhead. So I'd say base game to base game, they are pretty much comparable. The areas in which they are slightly more difficult are the areas that they have that the other game does not have. So I'm going to give a tie for the ease of learning and teach. As far as art and components, and usually I have art and components as kind of one category, although I should kind of break it up for this one, because let's start with art. Art, I prefer Vestige. I like the art of Vestige more. I feel it's more vibrant. In fact, I didn't even realize how much more vibrant it was, honestly, until I had it all set up for this comparison. Because I've always been totally fine with Vindication as far as how it presents, but then looking at the color contrast, I think this does a much better job at the overall color palette. A little bit to the obfuscation of how easily accessible it is in terms of readability of things at a glance. This one is a little bit too vibrant to that end, but if I'm looking at which one I think looks better on the table, I think Vestige looks better on the table. I think it just has a much more popping color palette. The card art, I think, is comparable game to game, but the actual overall graphic design and everything together, I think Vestige gets points there. As far as components, on the other hand, I'm going to give that to Vindication. To a large extent, they have a good overlap in components, but Vindication definitely has some nice upgraded elements, some metal tokens. Vestige does have like dual layer player boards, which are nice. I mean, this is the player dashboard for Vindication. I would love to have a dual layer player board for Vindication. This is something that it's such a nice little extra for it. Much better over here. The trackers on Vestige, there's little trackers to track your actions. I think Vindication might have something similar as an extra add-on buy. I can't recall. I know Unsettled, their other game, does, but in general, the baked-in player trackers here are better. But overall, as far as the form factor, the way Vestige splits it up into two boards, one of the big aspects is Vestige has a smaller box size. These are playmats that roll and fit nicely into this box over here, but it does mean that you're dealing with two separate areas over here, and it's not as easy to be able to look at the table and see what you need. Despite the fact that this is a large board with all the various cards spread around it, Vestige splits it up into two areas with different cards, and so either way, regardless of where you are on the table, you're either closer to the cards or close to the locations, but they're both small enough that whichever one you're closer to, the other one is going to be harder to read. And so I much prefer the larger table, the larger form factor that Vindication brings. I think that component-wise, I'm going to give that one a win over there, despite the fact that Vestige does have some nice things that I wish Vindication had as well. As far as the theme, that's another one I'm going to give to Vindication. Vindication kind of comes in more of just a dark fantasy setting. Vestige comes in with more of a kind of cyberpunk setting to it. There's a little bit more of that kind of techno factor. And I like the presentation. I don't have any complaints against the theme, but just for me personally, I'm always going to prefer dark fantasy over cyberpunk. Although I don't know if it's fair to call Vindication dark fantasy, but it's more fantasy adjacent, and whatever it is that it is, whether you call it dark fantasy or not, I do prefer that theme over the cyberpunk nature. Which brings us to the largest section, which is mechanics. Mechanics is always the largest breakdown over here because that's where you have to go into all the areas that the games are different in. I will try to cover the main ones that stood out to me as a player of both these games, but I'm sure I'm missing lots of small ins and outs. So just to give an example over here, if you're a fan of Vindication, if you know Vindication, you can take control of a location in Vindication only if you activate that location. In Vestige, you don't have to have activated that location that turn to take control. There's going to be a lot of small little details like that that I won't heavily focus on. I'm going to focus on the ones that meaningfully altered my play experience. To that end, there's a whole bunch. Let's start getting into it. Chopbots. Vestige adds chopbots to the game. Chopbots are kind of like contacts or companions, but these are going to be a little different in the sense that as you activate these, once they have 2 of your influence cubes on a chopbot, the ability is always active, which adds a little element that isn't usually present in Vindication, because Vindication, you only get the ability of the companion you currently activated. That's also true in Vestige in general, except for the chopbots. Chopbots are a little weaker when you activate them initially, but you can build up a little army of chopbots that all have these abilities that are adding to your ongoing passive tableau. That's a nice little area that I do appreciate that aspect, and again, it's something that I would love to see happen in Vindication. It just gives another flavor of mechanic and a new way to be mindful of them. Solo play is hands down going to be the biggest aspect that Vestige brings to the table. Not just solo, but the Nemesis play in general. There's going to be, I think there's 4 Nemesis if I'm not mistaken, between the base game, the various scrap packs you can get your hands on, but the Nemesis in the Nemesi, I think it's called Nemesi, in Vestige as a new way to interact with the game state. They basically give you these opponents who have their own things that they do, their own way they operate, the way they gain leverage being the points in the game, and you have to be mindful as far as how they operate in order to take advantage of them, regardless of whether you're playing it solo, cooperative, competitive, however, or team play against the Vindication, against the Nemesi. There's a variety of ways to play, but they basically add these Atana opponents with their own rules elements. Not just about point scoring, they also have their own specific win conditions that you have to be very aware of, because if they win, and whether you're playing against a human opponent or with the human opponent, you definitely don't want the Nemesis players winning. That's going to be a huge change that the game adds. For me personally, I've enjoyed fiddling with the Nemesi system, but I don't think it's the main way ultimately I would play Vindication in any ways. So it is a nice element that's going to be very relevant for those of you who want it, and we'll talk more about that in final thoughts. For me personally, it doesn't necessarily add to my experience. I think the Nemesis adds a lot of clever play opportunities, as well as teamwork. I think cooperative play against the Nemesis is so far my favorite way of experiencing it. The biggest problem I have with it is, first of all, I generally am not a player who loves dabbling with autonomous opponents. I don't love having to go through what you do. Now, I will say the system generally has it very clean and straightforward, but I think that my bigger issue is the fact that the difficulty adjustments of it feel all over the place. It doesn't feel like there's a clear way to be able to engage with the Nemesis in a balanced, like, levels of difficulty that you want. There's so many little tweaks and adjustments, the number of Nemesis you play against, whether you're playing team mode, whether you're playing it solo. It just seems like they kind of give a giant smorgasbord of how difficult any game state is going to be without a clear way to control that as the player. Which means I've played games against the Nemesi where we're able to take it down and deal with it, and I've played games against different Nemesi, or depending on different setups or board setups or player counts, where I just had the floor completely wipe me. I don't have a strong sense of the balance of, not balance is the wrong terminology, because I do think that there should be more and less difficult ways to engage with them. But it's more that as a player, I didn't have a sense of what I was walking into in any given game, depending on the tons of configurations you can do. Even small things like you can play against the Nemesi as individuals, because you could have 1, 2, 3 Nemesis in each game. But you can play against them as individual Nemesis who each score on their own, or you could play against them as a group and you add all the leverage together, and that's just a massive shift. There's no accommodating factor for you as a player. It's just a massive shift as, like, okay, we'll just triple the difficulty as far as how hard this is going to be. So it adds a lot. This solo play is going to be one of the biggest ways that Vestige stands out, but it's an area that I don't benefit as much from as a player who is primarily interested in just playing this with other human opponents. The covered ops. Covered ops are going to be a big element of the game, where you have these covered ops that are around the player board, that you could earn them as you hit certain scoring thresholds, which is a similar concept that we see in Vindication, where the endgame triggers are around the player board. That's true of Vestige as well. But in Vindication, you have a secret goal from the beginning. In Vestige, you have these covered ops you're going to be earning as you go around the board. I like and don't like that system. To me, I like having a goal that I can work towards from the beginning, because it gives me that knowledge of what I'm trying to do, as opposed to being, 3/4 of the way through the game and I get a goal and you can accomplish yours, I can't accomplish mine, and woohoo, it feels a little more random as far as whether that works with my strategy. I do like the fact that you're getting more than one secret goal, and the fact that you kind of have this unlocking system. There's like more of a funness to it, while less of a balance. So it's kind of, 6 of one, half dozen the other as far as that goes. The picking up of locations, the primary main systems in the game. And again, it's going to be different game to game, but you have relics, augmentations, traits, again, these different core, I'll call it the purple, green, and red cards, and the purple, green, and red cards. They operate a little bit differently, but they are the more powered up cards in both systems. The way you get them in Vindication is there are specific locations you go to in order to get those cards, which is pretty predictable. You look at the board, as you uncover the board, it's not going to be uncovered right away, but as you explore the board, you figure out what your pattern is going to be to get the cards that are most going to help you. In Vestige, on the other hand, it's a more dynamic system. Instead of having a specific location, you get these 3 core cards that are going to be responsible for a lot of your points. You are going to be looking at the top card of that stack. So if I want this card, I have to go to the Smuggler's Lair. But then if that becomes the next card, now I have to go to the Garage. You're going to have a changing system where it's more dynamic, and then the cards themselves tell you how to accomplish that job. You're picking up a job and then you're accomplishing that job. It has more of a pick up and deliver mechanic with a larger state of board dynamic to the game that totally changes the way you interact with these main card systems. For me, I kind of prefer Vindication on this one. I like the planning. For me, one of the things I love about Vindication is the ability to plan around what I'm going to do. And that lack of planning comes through both in terms of the covert ops, that's going to be something that's happening as you go, as well as the way you pick up jobs and things. It's going to be constantly changing where you can pick up the next job, and I may be trying to go get that from the Garage, but somebody else takes it, and I have to pivot my plans and go to the mercenary camp, as well as the fact that another big change is in Vindication, you can see the top companion at any given point, so you can plan around which companion you want to get, and in Vestige, the companions are always a face-down deck. All 3 of these elements add a lot more to the kind of random nature of the game and take away from my ability as a player to perfectly plan what it is I'm going to do. Make no mistake, in Vindication as well, things get in the way. I can plan for that companion, and you can get there first and take it from me. Nothing's guaranteed, but Vindication I have a much stronger sense of trying to plot how I'm going to play the game and take advantage of the board, as opposed to Vestige, I feel a bit more victim to the board constantly adjusting, and as someone who prefers the planning, Vindication is going to get a win in that sense. And lastly, we have endgame masteries over here. Masteries are a concept you can get in both Vestige and Vindication, but Vestige kind of just focuses it primarily based around the cards you get and nothing else. Vindication is a lot more focused on other ways to buy into those masteries, giving you a lot more flexibility to tilt the scales other than just purely buying a lot of cards. That one is kind of like either way for me. I definitely noticed the change, but I was fine with both systems. And then I guess actually lastly will be Vindication is going to be more expandable than Vestige. Both Vindication and Vestige have opportunities and ways to add things to the game. Vestige is mostly going to come in the form of additional card packs, at least right now, unless they do expansions down the road. Vestige is mostly going to come in the form of additional card packs called scrap packs that just add more cards to your decks. More card variety is always a nice thing. Vindication has multiple expansions, not that I've really played with them, but there's more expansions, there's more modules. Vestige does have a few of those. The additional locations is going to be something that you can start off having more locations than the basic recommended starting setup to give you a bit more variety, but I think Vindication has a lot more expandability to it, hence the whole big box and all the expansions therein. Which brings me to my final play this, not that. Which game do I prefer and why? Going through a quick recap over there, we have the price. Vestige definitely wins on price. Ease of learning is kind of a tie for me. Art goes to Vestige, components go to Vindication, theme goes to Vindication, and mechanics is mostly tilting towards Vindication. I do like this, I like the chop bots a lot, and the solo does add a large degree of variability to it, just one that I'm not going to benefit from as much as a player. Ultimately, when it comes down to play this, not that, I'm going to go with Vindication. There are elements of Vestige that I do like, and I wish I could see those things, both component-wise and mechanic-wise, in Vindication. I almost wish we could take the best parts of both of these and then give a perfect game perfectly designed for me. As it stands, though, for me, ultimately, when I think of the things that Vestige adds, the ways it improves the experience, it's mostly going to come down to some of the component upgrades, the more vibrancy of the art, and then the things like the chop bots, and small other mechanics, but the chop bots are going to be the biggest thing that I like mechanically speaking. The solo mode, which is a huge area of the game, those Nemesis players are a huge area of the game, I just think I would play with those less often, even when I'm playing it multiplayer, competitive, cooperative, I would be less likely to incorporate those. I do think they're very clever. I have played against most of the Nemesis opponents at this point, and I think they are very clever opponents. I'm just less likely to table them, which means a huge benefit of this is, you know, is something I'm not going to enjoy as much. The other thing that is a pro of Vestige is the ability and ease of tabling it. This all has a much smaller form factor. Every single box that you see here has already been condensed for me. Actually, it's not true. The playmats, there's additional playmats in here, but honestly, I don't think the playmats really add a lot, so I don't really need those. And everything else I've already put into the smaller box, which means this is easier to pull out and table. But I think when I weigh up how much easier this is to pull out and table versus my higher level of enjoyment for Vindication, I think I would rather pull out Vindication. Vestige is great, especially if you are someone that wants a solo experience or if price is one of the primary factors for you. I do think Vestige has enough of the core of Vindication that I still recommend it if any of those things are your particular concern. But if you're just looking for which game I like better and why, ultimately Vindication not just takes the cake, it takes the cake by a decent amount as far as I think the biggest things for me are the planning, the stronger ability to plan around all the things as opposed to having them happen to you as the game goes on, and then that table form factor aspect. I much prefer having a single bigger board than having two boards spread out. I have found that I drastically prefer that experience on my table. So overall, both of them are fantastic games. For me, I'm going to go with Vindication. In any case, and until next time, I hope you found this video helpful. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.